Hello and assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to the fourth segment of this discussion on Khidr and Moses and Khidr. If you've been with me until the third video, thank you so much for following along. The last video I spoke about I tried to make it very, make a very important statement, which is that these references to whether it be um, to um, Kadir, or whether it be phrases being used to refer to him, or sometimes we may even think the prophets or imams. It begins with them, but really and truly it includes us as well as believers, and I think that that's important to keep in mind. And I obviously showed that 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 it is possible for a believer to attain to the heights of reaching, having knowledge of the book, in the case of the Solomon story. And also, I referenced the Hadith al-Qudsi, which refers to the sacred traditions spoken directly by Allah to the Prophet Muhammad. And I showed in a hadith that I shared with you guys that what the ultimate state of purity looks like from that hadith perspective, and that really ultimately it is the height of Tawheed. Okay, because there is a oneness between Allah and his servant. I now want to continue in this segment of the video just to talk a little bit about so let's get back to the story. I know that I veered off and I talked a little bit of everything, but it was important to talk about mercy, knowledge, those who possess knowledge, who are firmly rooted in it, etc., etc. But I want to get back to the story now, and inshallah we can make some other assessments as we go along. And of course, it was important for me to veer off and talk about those other things because they shed light and gives us a better and more holistic understanding of this story. The Quran says that Moses said to him, so they eventually, when the servant told him, oh, did you see how that fish kind of took off in a very strange but marvelous way? And Moses says, well, that's the sign that we were looking for. So Quran says they doubled back. And then they found Khidr, the servant of Allah, whom Allah had bestowed mercy from his own presence as well as knowledge. Now, of course, we talked about knowledge being knowledge of the unseen. So when Moses found him, he said to him, may I follow thee on the footing that thou teach me some of that which has been taught of sound judgment? Now, it's interesting the wording of this verse, because the study Quran says translates this verse, and it says it uses the words sound judgment. So Moses is asking him to teach him something that he has been taught, right? Of sound judgment, right? He's not asking him to teach him, it's not like it's not like something concrete he's asking him to teach him. Like for instance, like a field of knowledge, for instance, like, if you ask someone, hey, can you teach me how to read musical notes, or how to read um, uh, the natural environment so that I can tell when rain will fall. It's nothing specific. He's asking him to teach him how to acquire sound judgment of things. That's what the Quran says, sound judgment. In other words, a deep wisdom. He's asking him to show me how to acquire this deep wisdom that you have been taught. Now, this word is a little bit confusing, taught. We hear in the Quran, Allah says, and we taught Adam the names. Okay? And we have to be careful with this word taught, because taught can be a little bit misleading. When Moses says to Khidr of something of that which thou has been taught, what we ought to really understand by this expression is not, it's Allah revealing something of himself, i.e. in this case, sound judgment or knowledge, deeper knowledge, in a way that is being inspired, right? And the fault here is really it's one of circumstance, because it's a circumstantial thing. It's an experiential thing. You can't teach someone experience, right? So he's already in a very Moses is already in a very, he's in a default position to fail. And well, I should say, the reason why I say that is because Allah hasn't taught Khidr anything by way of book. It's not a book knowledge. It's not like Allah revealed to Khidr a book and he studied it and he learned this thing and now he can pass on this book or the knowledge of this book to Moses. It's nothing like that, right? It's something that Allah has taught him. And of course, in the expression of the Quran, whenever we hear taught, it's never in the way human beings teach or convey knowledge or information. It's always from an inward point of view, where Allah is inspiring this, okay, through inspiration. Don't want to get too much bogged down by what inspiration means, but it's a way of conveying knowledge and wisdom through immediate or direct conveyance from the created to the creature. Anyways, this is how this knowledge that Khidr has been taught he has it. This is how he has it. So it's represented by the phrase sound judgment, right? Being able to discern between what is real and what isn't. And interestingly enough, in verse 10, in the story of the cave, the youths of the cave also pray to Allah to grant them sound judgment in their affairs. So we see the same thing being asked of a very close servant of Allah, the youths of the cave. And they said, "O our Lord, grant us mercy from thine own presence and make us inclined to sound judgment concerning our affairs," right? So this prayer of sound judgment is not unique to a prophet. It's not unique. It's this prayer of theirs. They're not asking. It's important that they're not asking for sound judgment. They have already attained it. But what they're really praying for is they're really praying that it remains in place and that it continues to develop, right? and that it stays intact. So they're saying, "Oh Lord, grant us mercy from thine own presence." The mercy, of course, being that, and make us incline to sound judgment. This is the mercy, to make us incline, right, to sound judgment. So the very thing that the youths of the case who are not prophets, they are praying for, and in many ways, it's not a prayer of because they lack this. It's a prayer really of appreciation and in asking for something that all servants of Allah ought to ask for, whether you have it or you don't have it. In this case, they clearly have it, right? And the Quran testifies to this in other verses of the story. In any case, we see that this is the exact same thing that Moses himself now is asking Khidr for, sound judgment. So he wants to be taught this. Now, it's not to say that Moses himself, especially we see in other parts of the Quran, that Moses, God says that when he attained his age of maturity, Allah bestowed upon him knowledge and sound judgment. But in this case, there's many ways to interpret that. We don't know. There's many ways to interpret that, but it's not in the same sense as what Khidr and what the men of the cave are referring to. It's a different type of reference. I don't want to get too bogged down into that. However, we have to recognize that this is God's prophet here, Moses al-Islam, and he is going to a servant of God that possessed really this higher level of spirituality, right? The level of like Tawheed, you can say the highest level of Tawheed. And he's asking him to show me, how do you get this? What is this? Show me, teach me. And Khidr says something that's really interesting. He says, verily, thou wilt not be able to have patience with me. And how canst thou have patience about things about which thy understanding is not complete? Now, there's some ways to look at this. You can say, take it on face value. You can say, well, yeah, he doesn't understand what he's getting himself to, so obviously it's very difficult for him. It will probably be very difficult for him to be patient with Khidr. But Khidr is making an even more subtle point, right? Because what Moses is asking Khidr is not just information. What he's asking Khidr is a state of awareness. He's asking Khidr to teach him this state of awareness. And Khidr is saying, well, your understanding is not complete. So it's possible you won't have patience with me, Moses. So what he's really saying is that you don't have this state of awareness, Moses. So your understanding of things won't be complete. And this is important to keep in mind, that these are states of awareness. These are states of spiritual awareness that Moses yet hasn't attained to. These are spiritual stations. And Khidr is telling him, listen, Moses, you're not there yet. You're not going to be able to have patience with me. The things that I do, you won't be able to understand them. Right? Your level of spirituality won't be able to grasp their true and deeper meanings. But of course, Moses was sent by Allah, so Moses has some excuse, right? He says, well, thou wilt find me if Allah so will truly patient, nor shall I disobey thee in aught. So of course, Khidr, what can Khidr say? Khidr knows that he has to take on Moses at some point, but he had to make a little bit of a statement before, right? He has to prefix this whole experience by telling him, Moses, you won't be able to to endure what I'm about to show you. The Quran says, but Khidr says, well, if then thou wouldest follow me, ask me no questions about anything until I myself speak to thee concerning it. So they both proceeded until when they were in the boat, he scuttled it. He being Khidr, said Moses, hast thou scuttled it in order to drown those in it? Surely a strange thing hast thou done. So Moses is shocked, like, what? Like, you just you just toppled the boat? Like, what the hell? Like, we were partly they were obviously on their way somewhere, and they got a ride from some people, I guess the boat ride, and he just toppled the darn thing. That must have been really shocking to not only Moses, but probably to everybody in there. They were probably freaking out. What the hell is this guy doing? But the Quran doesn't talk about that. The Quran just talks about Moses' reaction, right? And of course, Khidr says, did I not tell thee that thou canst have no patience with me, Moses? Moses catches himself. He says, rebuke me not for forgetting, nor grieve me by raising difficulties in my case, right? So he catches himself, right? And he remembers now. He says, oh, well, yeah, don't hold it against me for forgetting. I remember this is one of the things we talked about. Okay, don't raise any issues, that may be difficult for me to respond to you as to why I forgot about this, right? Then they proceeded until when they met a young man, he slew him. Moses said, hast thou slain an innocent person who had slain none? Surely a foul, unheard of thing hast thou done. Now, so in Sufi literature, they have pointed out that that Khidr represents the mystical aspect of Islam, meaning the inner and deeper path of Islam, and Moses represents the outer esoteric path of Islam. And it's not in the sense that every time Moses protests the doings of Khidr, he's not wrong. He's well within his rights and within the Sharia, if you want to put it, the scriptural law of justice and equality and right doing, right? So he's not wrong. He is wise enough to recognize that this is not the way a servant of Allah ought to behave. Certainly not from the Torah perspective. And obviously, as Muslims, we too would say the same thing, certainly from the Islamic Sharia perspective. To kill someone who's innocent, this is haram. So Moses is absolutely correct. So he says to Moses, after Moses says this to him, you slayed someone who's innocent, like who has done nothing wrong. This is not only is this wrong, but this is abhorrent. This is, egregious. Khidr says to him, did I not tell thee that thou canst have no patience with me, Moses? Again, Moses catches himself and says, "If ever I ask thee about anything after this, keep me not in thy company, then wouldest thou have received full excuse from my side." So I can't imagine at this point, Moses probably is also fed up with this guy. Right? Because they've only had two instances where he has done something that Moses is obviously at heads over heels about. Like, he's like, what's going on? This guy's crazy, right? So Moses said, "Well, hey, listen, bro. Like, if ever you do something again and you find, just let me go, man. I'll just I give you every reason to call it quits between you and I." So the Quran says, then they proceeded until when they came to the inhabitants of a town, they asked them for food, but they refused them hospitality. They found there a wall on the point of falling down, but he set it up straight, he being Khidr. Moses said to him, if thou hadst wished, surely thou couldst have exacted some recompense for it. And of course, Moses couldn't keep quiet, right? So they went into, I guess, on their way to in their travels, they reached this town in which the people were very inhospitable. Probably at that time, it was not the custom for people who, like Moses and the Khidr, they're probably at the mercy of the generosity and hospitality of this town. But when they got there, they actually got the opposite treatment. And being the custom not to be like that, it obviously struck a chord with Moses to wonder, why would you do such a nice thing in a town where people are obviously so inhospitable and so unkind. Obviously what he did was there must have been a wall that was old and he just rebuilt it, and obviously made the area look a lot better or whatever, aesthetically and whatever else. And maybe there was some other use that the wall served, we don't know, but it was enough to make Moses wonder, like, why would these people were very ungrateful, not ungrateful but unkind, and why would you do such a generous act for them? And of course that became the last straw. He answered Moses, he said, "This is the parting between me and thee. Now I will tell thee the interpretation of those things over which thou wast unable to hold patience." So Khidr says to Moses, as for the boat that he scuttled and turned over, it belonged to certain men in dire want. They plied on the water. I but wished to render it unserviceable. For there was after them a certain king who seized on every boat by force. So apparently, him scuttling the boat and causing the boat to I think the traditions say that he made a hole in the boat or something like that, and the boat sank into the bottom of the river or wherever it was traveling. And so obviously this must have been very shocking for everybody. However, Allah had informed Khidr that, although unbeknownst to everyone in the boat, that there was this king who was seizing people's boats, people's property by force and confiscating it. And this boat obviously belonged to this man or family who was plying their trade and making their income by taking passengers back and forth. And so, although the boat would sink to the bottom of the river, they can always later on go back and retrieve it and then fix it and continue with. Now, I'm being very meticulous in the story because I know not everyone who might be watching this video might be Muslim, so excuse the over detailing of the story for those of you who are Muslims and are familiar with the story. Now he says, as for the youth, his parents were people of faith, and we feared that he would grieve them by obstinate rebellion and ingratitude, rebellion and ingratitude to Allah and man. So, so he took his life. So in other words, this son was perceived to be a cause or a potential cause for great harm as he would get older, as he got older. And so the command was to take his life. Now, there's issues here because now when you look at the hadiths or even in the traditions that talk about this, they say that the young man hadn't been a source of trouble yet. And this is a bit problematic for me because I would be reluctant to say that Allah would order the taking of someone's life even when they haven't yet committed anything wrong. So I'm suspecting that there was some indications of trouble from this young man and that they feared that this would continue and get worse. Now, if indeed there was no actual trouble by this young man and his life was taken, we can safely say that this young man was actually also not only was his parents saved from the trouble that he would cause them and the grief that he would cause them, but also the community as well. And more importantly, even the young man was saved in that he was spared from that type of life and the sins that would accrue from living that type of life. And so Allah, we can probably safely say Allah saved him by taking his life early enough to prevent him from incurring those sins and ultimately admitting him into paradise. So in this sense too, Allah is being generous to his parents who are believers in that he's taken a particularly potentially troublesome son of theirs and admitting them into paradise. So it's a win-win situation for everybody. Maybe with the exception of Khidr, because Moses it's pretty upset at him. So Khidr says, so we desired that their Lord would give them in exchange a son better in purity of conduct and closer in affection, right? So trying to spare them from the grief and would eventually give them other children, in this case a son, that would be better in purity of conduct. Interesting, this term, purity of conduct. Once again, the believers, their destiny is purity again, being alluded to or explicitly alluded to in the Quran or referred to in the Quran. Now, Khidr says, as for the wall, it belonged to 2 youths, orphans in the town. There was beneath it a buried treasure to which they were entitled. It's interesting, the study Quran says that this treasure, the wording that's being used to refer to treasure, it's not necessary. There's an indication that it may not necessarily be gold or treasure in the typical ordinary way we would understand that, but actually it could even be some kind of information on maybe documents that harbored some kind of information that would be relevant to them or would serve them in some meaningful way. It can even be something like that. The treasure is what the treasure is obviously not very important, but that's a little interesting tidbit that I wanted to share with you guys. And the Quran says that their father had been a righteous man, so that thy Lord desired that they should attain their age of full strength, maturity, age of maturity, and get out their treasure, a mercy from thy Lord. Once again, we hear this phrase, a mercy from us, a mercy from thy Lord. I did it not of my own accord. Such is the interpretation of those things over which thou wast unable to hold patience. Right, so Khidr says that all of these things was a mercy from thy Lord, right? And I did not do it of my own accord. So he's now describing his spiritual state. He's saying that these actions of mine is the result of Tawheed, is the result of my will and the will of Allah being one, as with the Hadith al-Qudsi was describing how the servant of Allah has reached when Allah loves him and he advances on the path and Allah loves him. This is the height of Allah's love for him. So Khidr is also admitting this state. He's saying, hey, it wasn't my will, it's the will from Allah's will. And he says that such is the interpretation of those things over which thou wast unable to hold patience. I don't have much time, and I want to make an important statement here. So Khidr says, hey, this is the stuff about which over which there was unable to hold patience, right? So he's saying, for these reasons, obviously, because you didn't know them, you were unable to be patient with me. And so what he actually ends up teaching him is not so much why he did those things that he did. And oftentimes, Muslims, particularly scholars, when they talk about this story or they do tafsir on this story, they're focused on the knowledge of the unseen. And really, that's not the focus of the story. This story is not about what Khidr tells Moses at the end. That's not the important part of this story. The most important part of this story that Khidr teaches Moses, that Allah teaches us through this story, is that this state cannot be taught. It's impossible to teach. You can't teach it. Certainly not from a human pedagogy point of view, right? The way we tend to teach or convey information, generally speaking, as human beings. That rather, this thing that he's looking for, the only source that can truly teach Moses is God himself, just as God himself taught Khidr. And of course, we know this by the fact that Moses is incapable of being able to stay with Khidr longer than 3 occasions, right? Simply because he is lacking the understanding and only perceiving things certainly from the scriptural point of view, or as Sufis like to say, the esoteric point of view, meaning that he can only judge and interpret or discern the actions of Khidr from a point of view of right and wrong, from the Sharia, or from the perspective of revelation, which is the esoteric guidance of God. Let's go for a second. And while that has its merit and is, of course, Moses is not wrong, right? However, from the inner or Gnostic or from a position of wisdom, which is represented in the character and judgment of Khidr about things, he is unable to understand their deeper or hidden realities. Now, what's interesting about this is that the reason why, as we went through, as if you had stuck with me through the previous videos, you would have seen me talking about intellect. And the reason why I made mention of intellect was because I wanted to show that this intellect, as I had mentioned, deals with or refers to people who have the ability to understand the hidden or inner or deeper meaning of things, or the realities behind things. Certainly from a scriptural point of view, it refers to people who have an understanding of God's revelation, a deeper ability to discern what the revelation is actually referring to. And that's why we see the Quran says that none knows its meanings except Allah and His Messenger and those rooted in knowledge, or those who, and then when we looked at those who are rooted in knowledge, we saw that these people are the same people to whom God refers to as people of intellect. Now, when we looked at people of intellect, we see that what intellect actually is referring to is, in general, the Muslim community. And when we looked even further, we saw how God was calling out to people within the Islamic community, among the believers, to rise up, because amongst them are people who have mystic knowledge. And these are another layer to which people of intellect is being referred to. Now, just coming back to this idea of intellect. In the Quran, intellect actually doesn't, as one might automatically assume, means rationality or logic per se. It's actually not that. What it actually means is referring to a faculty that is referred to as the heart, or the very core of a human being, that has the ability to discern that which is truth or hidden realities. It's basically the ability to ascertain wisdom through this faculty of the heart. Listen to what the study Quran says about intellect. It says that possessors of intellect translates to ulul albab, which literally means possessors of the kernel, using, of course, the symbolism of the kernel or of the nut to show wisdom is deeper than the shell, that one needs to grasp and be nourished by the kernel or inner truths of a thing. Intellect, of course, translates to albab, which has the primary meaning of pit or kernel, right, denoting pure inner essence of something. And of course, the secondary meaning of pure intellect or heart, insofar as these represent the purest spiritual essence or core of a human soul. Such people are said to possess literally the knowledge of the inner essence of things, which must be discerned with the intellect or the heart rather than reason or senses. the intellect is very different from reason or rationality in that it represents a faculty for the attainment of unitive knowledge directly connected to God, through which one acquires knowledge of the essential realities, i.e., the unseen. Whereas reason is the human faculty of discernment that arrives at knowledge through a logical, analytical, and dialectical process. So essentially, what this is saying or admitting to us is that this word intellect has a much deeper meaning than we typically would like to understand it, or we would normally understand it to be when we think of the word intellect. It actually has the meaning of referring to the heart. And the heart is the faculty that is able to discern realities or hidden or deeper truths. And what's important here is that we see the Quran constantly referring to the believers or the Muslim community as people of intellect. And in my lecture, I went to show that not only did it refer to people as was referring to the community as people of intellect, but it even went so far as to specifically call out the believers amongst them, and refer to some of them as having hidden or mystic knowledge. So rise up. And so what I wanted to show by mentioning these things was that Khidr is a clear example of the believers, or one of the believers, rising up in the community through the ranks, through the spiritual ranks, and that and that just as he was able to acquire this unitive knowledge directly connected to God through ascertaining the reality of things, which is essentially what Khidr is able to do. He's able to understand reality or human experience in a completely different way than Moses is able to. Why? Because he has this faculty. He's experiencing his complete human experience and spiritual experience from a position of the heart. And so he's able to access the unseen and able to understand things in a much deeper and hidden way. And these are the connections I was trying to make as I was highlighting these different features of the Quranic verses as it relates to intellect and those who possess it, and what it really is referencing as it's talking to the believers. Of course, this faculty, the heart, and its capacity to acquire hidden knowledge, it's not something that can be taught. It's not something you can go to school for. It's not something you can go to a Sufi halakha or a place where one tries to acquire a spiritual mentor or a master, or even go to an Islamic house to study and acquire it. It's just not something that can be done that way. However, it's not to say that a guide or a spiritual guide may not have its place or its relevance, but what's being taught here is that even though that Moses has a very good teacher in the person of Khidr, the lessons that God wants to teach us really is that this cannot be taught. And there is a complete division or divide between someone who is religious, like Moses is. Obviously, he represents the best in religious ideals, or how to behave as a religious person. Remember, because everything that he complains about isn't wrong. It's just that it's incomplete. His knowledge is incomplete. So God is saying that while we may be able to behave religiously and act according to the Sharia, that knowledge is good and it has its place, but it may not necessarily be a complete form of knowledge, right? We may know the will of God in terms of what he reveals in scriptures, but how do we use that wisdom and that knowledge in life as life is unfolding in the immediate sense of the term of the moment, in the immediate sense, in the moment, is something completely different, and one has to have a deep hidden ability to discern and understand the experiences around oneself in order to make an accurate assessment or judgment that can only come from God himself. And that's really the essential point that the Quranic story of Moses and Khidr is trying to make. I want to thank you for your time, and I want to thank you if you have stayed with me through the beginning of the series of these videos. I really appreciate you sticking with me. If you've been enjoying these videos, I want to ask you to just give me a like on YouTube and subscribe if you've been paying attention from the very beginning, because as I do more videos, you can certainly get your notifications if you subscribe. And also, if you are on Facebook and you like the content, please share it with your friends and family. Thank you again for your time, and good night.